You keep telling yourself that you need more discipline. That is usually the first lie, because most people do not fail at the beginning. They fail in the middle. They begin with enough emotion, enough energy, enough clarity, enough temporary fire to make movement look easy. They make the list, they set the plan. They promise themselves, this time will be different. And for a moment, it is. They wake up earlier, they train, they work, they cut distractions. They feel clean for a few days. Then, the emotional payment disappears. The task is still there. The standard is still there. The unfinished work is still there. But now it feels heavier. Not because the work changed, because the feeling changed. That is the point where most people begin inventing explanations. They say they are tired. They say the timing is off. They say they need to reset properly. They say they will come back stronger tomorrow. But what they call a setback is usually just the first moment the work stopped entertaining them. And that is where the truth begins. You do not have a discipline problem in the way you think. You have an attachment problem. You are attached to the version of effort that still gives something back immediately. You like effort when it feels productive. You like it when progress is visible. You like it when the body responds. You like it when the numbers move. You like it when people notice. You like it when momentum creates emotional proof. But the real test is never there. The real test arrives when the work becomes plain, when the day feels ordinary, when the result is delayed, when the body is not dramatic, when the mind is bored, when nobody is watching, when improvement is too small to impress you. That is where your pattern shows itself, because at that point, you are no longer choosing between action and inaction. You are choosing between standard and mood. And most people still serve mood. They do not say that openly. They speak in better language. They call it alignment. They call it balance. They call it listening to themselves. They call it protecting their peace. They call it waiting until they are in the right state. But underneath all of that language is the same weakness. They only trust themselves when action feels supported. They do not trust themselves when action feels dry, repetitive, inconvenient, or invisible. That is why they keep starting over. Not because they are incapable, because they have trained themselves to move only when emotion signs the order. So every cycle looks the same. A strong start, a sharp drop, a negotiated delay, a quiet disappearance, then another speech about becoming serious. That cycle is not bad luck. It is obedience to feeling. And the more you repeat it, the more dangerous it becomes, because eventually you stop trusting your own declarations. You say you will do something, and part of you no longer believes it. You make a plan, and something inside you smirks. You set a target, and your own history begins speaking against you. Not out of mystery, out of evidence. You have shown yourself too many times that your word only holds while the mood is favorable. That is expensive, because once your own mind learns that your standards are negotiable, every future promise weakens on contact. Then the problem gets worse than unfinished tasks. You begin building an identity around interruption. You become the man who almost commits, the man who almost changes, the man who almost finishes, the man who is always preparing for a standard he refuses to live under. That is not a small flaw. That is a dangerous way to exist, because life does not usually collapse through one dramatic act of failure. It erodes through incomplete repetitions. Plans not carried through, standards not held, promises not honored, effort withdrawn the moment it loses warmth. And after enough of that, a person begins confusing intention with character. They think wanting the standard is the same as living it. It is not. Wanting is common. Speaking is common. Announcing change is common. Finishing is rare, because finishing does not ask what kind of mood you are in. It only asks whether your word has rank over your feeling. That is the beginning of discipline. Not intensity, not inspiration, not the emotional high of a new decision. Discipline begins when the performance value of the work dies and the work is still done. When it is quiet and still done. When it is boring and still done. When it is thankless and still done. When it is heavy and still done. Until that point, you are not testing discipline. You are testing preference. And preference has never built a finished man.
If this message resonates with you,
Like and subscribe for more content like this. This channel is built for people who want control over their focus, not constant noise. There is a moment in every pursuit where the wait becomes real. Not imagined, not anticipated, not dramatized in your head. Real. It does not arrive loudly. It arrives quietly, almost without announcement. The work is still the same. But something shifts. The effort no longer feels like progress. The repetitions feel slower. The results feel delayed. The feedback becomes unclear. The reward becomes distant. And the mind starts asking a different question. Not, can I do this? But, is this worth it? That question is where most people lose position. Because it sounds reasonable. It sounds intelligent. It sounds reflective. It sounds like someone evaluating their path. But most of the time, it is not evaluation. It is resistance, speaking in a smarter voice. The work did not become pointless. It simply stopped feeding you. Stopped giving immediate proof. Stopped confirming your identity. Stopped making you feel like you were moving forward fast enough. And now, you are exposed to something most people avoid. Unrewarded effort. That is the exact point where finishing begins. Not before. Before that, you are still being paid. Paid with momentum. Paid with visible change. Paid with emotional reinforcement. Paid with the feeling that your actions mattered instantly. Now the payment is delayed. Now the work continues without applause. And that is where the standard either holds or breaks. Most people believe they quit because the task became too hard. That is rarely true. They quit because the work stopped confirming them. They stopped feeling like the kind of person who follows through. So instead of proving it through action, they retreat and protect the identity through explanation. I need to reset. This isn't the right time. I'll come back stronger. I need to think it through again. All of those are exits, clean exits, socially acceptable, internally justified, easy to repeat without consequence in the moment. But every time you take one, something shifts inside you. Not emotionally, structurally. You lower the threshold at which you allow yourself to stop. You make it easier to leave next time, because you've already proven to yourself that leaving is an option. That is how the standard erodes, not through failure, through permission. You give yourself permission to step away when the work becomes neutral. Then, when it becomes uncomfortable. Then, when it becomes repetitive. Eventually, you don't even reach the difficult part anymore. You exit early, before the resistance even fully forms. That is why your effort feels inconsistent, not because you lack ability, because you have trained yourself to respond to weight by reducing output, instead of increasing stability. The moment it gets heavy is not a signal to reconsider. It is a signal that you have reached the part most people avoid. That is why it feels different. That is why it feels uncomfortable. That is why your mind starts negotiating. Because this is the first point where the outcome is no longer guaranteed by emotion. Now it depends on standard. And standard does not care how it feels. It does not adjust to mood. It does not negotiate with fatigue. It does not require motivation to operate. It simply remains. The question is whether you remain with it or step away the moment the weight becomes noticeable. Most people step away. Then they tell themselves they will come back stronger. But they rarely do, because they never built the ability to stay when the work stopped paying them. And without that ability, every new attempt will follow the same pattern. Strong start, early progress, loss of emotional return, internal negotiation, clean exit. Repeated. That is not a motivation problem, it is a tolerance problem. You do not tolerate the phase where effort feels empty, so you never reach the phase where effort compounds. You keep circling the same beginning, mistaking movement for progress, until eventually the pattern becomes your default, and the moment it gets heavy, you already know how it ends. At some point, it stops being about starting again. It becomes about whether you will finish at all. Because starting is no longer your issue. You've already proven you can begin. You can create momentum. You can generate intention. You can produce effort in short bursts. That is not rare. What's rare is finishing without interruption. Not when it feels good, when it feels flat. Not when progress is obvious, when progress is slow. Not when you're energized, when you're neutral. That is where most people fall out, because they are still waiting for something to carry them. Motivation, clarity, a better moment, a stronger version of themselves. That version never arrives, not in the way you expect. It is not something you become first. It is something you prove through repetition. You do not feel like the kind of person who finishes. Then start finishing. You start finishing, and then you become that person. That order matters, because if you wait to feel ready, you will remain in preparation. Always close, never complete. That is how years disappear, not through failure, through unfinished cycles. You move, you stop, you reset, you restart. You convince yourself this one will be different. Then you repeat. Eventually, that becomes your identity. The man who is always almost there, always building, always planning, never done. That is not neutral. That is decay. Because every unfinished attempt leaves residue, doubt, hesitation, reduced belief in your own word. And over time, that accumulation becomes heavier than the work itself. Now you are not just fighting the task, you are fighting your own history. Every past exit sits behind you. Every time you stepped away becomes evidence, and when you try again, something inside you already questions the outcome. Not because you lack potential, because you have not built proof. Finishing is how you rebuild that proof. Not talking, not planning, not restarting. Finishing. Holding the line when the work becomes repetitive. Holding the line when the result is delayed. Holding the line when the mind tries to negotiate. That is how the pattern breaks. Not through intensity, through consistency under pressure. Because the person who finishes is not the one who never struggles. It is the one who does not exit when struggle appears. That is the separation. And it is not wide. It is small. It is the decision to continue when there is no emotional reward. The decision to complete what you said you would do without adding conditions. That is where your standard is defined, not in what you intend, in what you carry through. If you finish, something changes. Not externally at first, internally. Your word gains weight. Your decisions become sharper. Your mind stops arguing as much because it has seen you follow through. That is stability. That is control. And once that begins, progress compounds. But if you don't finish, nothing changes. Not your habits, not your results, not your identity. Only the illusion improves. You become better at explaining, better at restarting, better at sounding serious. But the outcome stays the same. So the decision is simple, not easy. Simple. Finish, or stay exactly where you are. Subscribe for more clarity like this.